But well, for some of you, it may have been a personal story, maybe, sometime in your life, you have felt like maybe you didn't quite belong somewhere, or maybe you know of someone in your life that has had feelings of questioning, do I belong in this space? How do I know I should be here? And so I can tell you a little bit about me. So I'm a clinical social worker. I'm a federal employee. I've been an employee since 2010. I'm also a Navy veteran, and currently in my role, I am a medical social worker. And then when I'm not a medical social worker, I love to present and share information about leadership, different topics that spark my interest in things that I've been involved in my work. I'm also a doctoral student at the University of Alabama, Doctor of Social Work program, and I am an alumni of the University of Washington. I'm from Washington State, currently living in Washington State. And so that's a little bit about my background. I don't have any disclosures, no conflicts of interest to share today. But I wanted to talk about, before we jump into the agenda, I wanted to talk about what sparked me to do this presentation. And it came from a personal experience. Sadly, not the first experience ever, but a personal experience that I had. I was at lunch with a friend, with a coworker, and this was on a weekend, so it wasn't work related. And we were meeting up, and just I think my coworker had gotten a new job. She had gotten a new job in another agency. It was a promotion, and so we were just sort of, congratulating her and just supporting her. So it was me, and it was two people. It was just me and her at this lunch. And during that experience, our waiter, the person that was helping us, get our orders together, bringing our food to us, I just noticed that that person was I didn't feel really seen by that person, although I was sitting there with my colleague. And sometimes when you don't know whether a feeling is real, it might be in your head. You're like, well, maybe I'm just thinking something. Maybe it's just me. And it wasn't until, we were wrapping up our meal, and the waiter came by and said, he looked right at my friend and said, how was your meal today? How are you doing? Do you need anything? And he did not look at me. He did not turn to me. He did not ask me how my meal was. And she proceeded to answer his question, and everything went off smoothly, and he left. She felt, taken care of. She had her needs met. And I just sat there feeling ignored. And I just sort of like, did he not see me there? I was sitting there with her. We both had lunch, and, we both ordered. But no one inquired about how I felt and what that meal was like for me. And so I started to think, wow, I wonder how many people have this experience, not only just sitting at lunch with friends, but also at work. And, just thinking about the pandemic and how a lot of workplaces have turned to be hybrid. You have people in the office, and you have people, tuning in online. And ironically, my new position, I am primarily online, and I only go into the office a couple of days a week. So this is like the perfect timing for this, I feel. So, that story really sparked me to present this today. And really what happened after that is I left the restaurant. I didn't mention it to my friend. I don't think she realized either. She didn't seem like she noticed anything. And so I left, and I thought about it, and I said, this is not right. I felt like something wasn't right. And the way that I was ignored should not be an experience that other people should have. And I did feel like it was because of what I look like as a Black woman. So I called the restaurant, and I spoke to the headquarters, and I made a complaint. And I kept it moving. After that, I kept it moving. So this really is an opportunity for us to sort of have discussions about how are we creating cultures of belonging within our workplaces, because we spend a huge amount of time at work. We spend what, 80% of our time with coworkers. And so, in doing work and serving people. And if we don't feel like we belong there, and then we go into our communities and we don't feel like we belong, that's a huge problem that we should really be talking more about and figuring out how we can change that. So that's what I wanted to share. And again, you may have been sparked by a personal situation yourself. So like I said, this is going to be interactive. And so my first question to you is, what does belonging mean to you? And what I would like for you all to do, whoever's here will make the best of it, is Amy is going to help me with a whiteboard. And so on that whiteboard, I want you to just write out the answer to this question. What does belonging mean to you?
All right, so you should see an annotate option on your screen. It's usually up at the very top where you can click on to annotate. If you see that option up at the top of your screen, you can go ahead and annotate on the slides. If not, you should be able to type in the chat, or you can unmute yourself to weigh in as well. Everybody has that option to chat.
We have no option to chat or annotate from Deidre. I don't know if that's for other users as well, Amy.
Yeah, Deidre, if you want to come off of mute and weigh in, if you're available. And it looks like John just said, allow me to be me.
Yes, allow you to be you. Perfect. What are some other ways that you can be your whole self and show up? And go ahead and just shout it out. I think we'll just shout it out this time.
And I'm just going to double check. You should be able to hit that unmute button. And make sure everybody has that option real quick. Deidre?
Okay, well, I can read the chat too. So LaDon says belonging means the comfort of experiencing psychological safety with colleagues in the workplace. So true. And that's a lot to unpack, right? Just that comment alone, we could really unpack and see, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? What are some other thoughts? Maybe it means that you can show up flawed, right? Maybe you can show up as your unique self, whatever that looks like. Maybe you like to wear your hair a certain way. And so you show up with your authentically, lovingly way that you like to wear your hair. Maybe it's coming with your own mindset about how you experience the world that is maybe different because you have a different lens than most people, because of your age or because of your race or because of your ethnicity or because of where you grew up. Maybe it's because maybe you can show up, and belonging means that you have no fear of being rejected for being who you are, for being your true self. Right? Let's talk about, what does belonging sound like? So you could stop sharing, Amy. I'm not sure if you are doing that. So when we think about belonging, what does that sound like? Go ahead and either type in the chat or come off of mute. I'm just curious. How do you know you belong somewhere if you only had sounds to listen to? What would people be saying to you?
What are your ideas?
What are your ideas?
What are your thoughts?
What are your thoughts? Yep. Maybe hello. Welcome. How are you today? Tell me about yourself. How about, I noticed you were not at the meeting yesterday. What happened? How are you doing? Tell me about your experience and your background. I'm really curious to know. How about, I'm glad to have you on my team. And John says, curious questions to get to know your colleagues. Absolutely, right? So last question here, and we'll dive deeper into what this means, what this actually, how this plays out, is what does belonging feel like? So think back to a time, hopefully it was in the workplace, but think back to a time where you felt like you belonged somewhere. You belonged with this group, in this place, in this setting. What were some of the indicators that you felt that, hey, this is a place that feels good for me? You can come off of mute and type it in the chat. Some feelings might be feeling safe, feeling connected, feeling that you are valued. Maybe there's a sense of you're at ease, you can sort of let your hair down, no one's judging you, you can be yourself. There's a sense of warmth maybe in that space. Maybe you feel supported, held, protected. And so it's so important that we are able to draw experiences where we feel that we have a sense of belonging, that we know what belonging sounds like, and we know what it means. So let's talk about the actual definition, because I think some of us may not have a good understanding of it, of like what it means, especially in the workplace. So it's more than just being seen. It is having a meaningful voice and the opportunity to participate in the design of social and cultural structures. It means having the right to contribute to and make demands on society and political institutions. It's more than just feeling included, right? It's having a piece of the pie. It's having your thoughts, your ideas, who you are included in that conversation. And how powerful is that? So when we think about when we go to work every day, how many of us feel like we belong based on John Powell's definition of belonging, right? Not many. And we see this every day because many people are leaving their jobs to find places where they feel like they can be themselves. We've heard of the Great Resignation. We've heard of all those things, right? Where people are trying to find that place where they can be themselves. And sometimes it ends up being, hey, I'm going to just go into business for myself, because that's where I can decide that I can make decisions, that I can be heard, that I can be a part of something bigger. So we have a crisis of belonging in our society, and we are seeing it every day. John Powell, the director of Othering and Belonging Institute, he says that our interest in belonging is guided by the question of how we can embed belonging within the systems and structures that shape our lives. Our focus on structures reflects the reality that interpersonal work alone cannot fix systematic and structural othering. And this is illustrated, he says, in the wide disparities that we see in public health, in housing, educational outcomes, across all identity groups. We see it in our workplaces as well. So at its core, structural belonging requires mutual power. It requires access and opportunity. among all groups and all individuals within a shared container. And that shared container can be our society, it can be our organizations, it can be a club that we are a member of, it can even be our family. Belonging means more than just access. It means having a meaningful voice, like I mentioned earlier, an opportunity to participate. So what do we gain from belonging? What is the cost of belonging? Right? So, here are some statistics about what belonging means for Americans in our society. 64% of Americans report not belonging and not feeling like they belong in the workplace. Americans report non-belonging in 3 life settings: the workplace, the nation, and in their local communities at 74%. So we have folks walking around not feeling like they belong anywhere, not knowing, not having a sense of connection. And perhaps the most concerning is that 1 in 5 Americans report feeling non-belonging across each and every life setting, meaning that they don't feel like they fit in with their friends, their family. That's pretty significant. Research also says that Americans are more likely to report with belonging if they see themselves as better off or much better off economically than the average American person. They're much more likely to feel a sense of belonging if they're older, if they identify as a woman or a man versus another gender. They're more likely to feel a sense of belonging if they identify as heterosexual, or if they identify as homosexual, rather than identifying as bisexual, pansexual, asexual, or queer. Americans who report feeling less than, this is interesting, they actually tend to be younger. They tend to be first generation or non-citizen immigrants. They identify as non-Hispanic white, or they identify as a gender minority. Our US workplaces provide a unique opportunity for positive social connection with diverse others, right? Look in your workplaces, this is an opportunity to connect with other people, yet you have huge numbers of folks feeling like they can't connect, they cannot relate to others. I thought this was an interesting statistic as well. So Hispanic and white respondents to the study reported the highest percentages of national belonging, while those who identified as multiracial or they selected other as their racial identity, they had the highest percentages of exclusion. Also, parenthood was also another interesting statistic. So a higher percentage of parents report belonging than folks that are not parents in the workplace. And I could definitely see how that might be. If you have a workplace and there's baby showers, there's discussions about family, and you're not someone who has has children, how do you participate in those discussions? How do you feel included? So if you look at by generation, almost 2 out of 3 employees in the US today say that they experience non-belonging. And as you can see on this slide based on generations, workplace belonging is associated with being older, socioeconomically better off, as I mentioned, less stress, having children, identifying as a woman or a man, identifying as heterosexual, or identifying as homosexual. But as you can see in this slide, millennials, primarily millennials and Gen Xers feel ignored. Many of them feel stressed. And so we need to be thinking about how do we bring a sense of belonging into our workplaces, especially now that folks are not always in the office. People are working from home. And there's already a disconnection when you are online. There's more effort to understand and communicate when you're online versus in person, to have those discussions, to get to know people. So it's been said that businesses spend nearly $8 billion each year on diversity, equity, and inclusion training. And this is according to research from McKinsey and Company. Yet most employees report still feeling like they don't belong. So I wanted to bring in Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory. I think many of us have heard of this theory before. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So Maslow posits that human needs are arranged in a hierarchy. And so what he says is that the hierarchy of needs places survival needs at the bottom and self-actualization needs at the top. And as we move up that hierarchy, it gets harder to satisfy the needs due to interpersonal and other environmental issues and barriers around us. And survival needs are the physiological and immediate needs that we have as human beings, while the higher needs become increasingly more psychological and more long-term. So belonging is actually a psychological need that we all have as human beings. We're here to be in groups. We're here to connect. And so when we have disconnection through technology, when we have disconnection through polarization, we are fighting against our innate abilities to be with one another. So we know that human beings are motivated by a hierarchy of needs. Needs are organized in a hierarchy of our propensity, in which more basic needs must be more or less met. The order of needs is not rigid, though. This is a very flexible paradigm, right? It's flexible. And more research on Maslow's hierarchy of needs is showing that you don't necessarily have to have your basic needs met in order to achieve the higher levels of the pyramid. There's many situations where some situations in India where you have people in huge amounts of poverty, but they still have a sense of belonging, right? They still have community, they still have love, but maybe their basic needs like shelter and food and water are not really being met. So there's a lot of argument about that, how this theory is not as rigid as it once was believed to be. But the idea of it is that belongingness is a part of that hierarchy. And so when we think about what is it that every person needs, when we're trying to figure out, someone is not as connected, they're not as motivated at work, they don't seem like they want to be here. Maybe taking a look at, well, what are the basic needs that they have, finding out what is it that's not being met. And it could be the sense of like, I don't feel like I really belong here. No one's asking me how I'm doing, no one cares. My ideas are not being taken seriously. I don't have a stake here. And that can help us peel back some layers and begin to help make some change in the workplace. So as I mentioned earlier, belonging is more than just a social connection. A recent article in Forbes, and the title is really interesting. The title is Belonging, the Intersection of DEI and Engagement. And they noted that you can increase diversity in the workforce, you can treat people fairly, you can include them, but if they still truly don't feel as though they belong, then you actually are missing the mark. And that is why so many studies of DEI and inclusion and all that stuff is showing that belonging is like the missing link. So when employees feel like they truly belong at work, they feel that they're more connected and they're more committed to the mission and to the organization. They're more likely to stay. And so we want to be looking at that as a key piece of our DEI efforts. So So I want to take a pause here and just ask you guys, what unique challenges with belonging and inclusion have you noticed or experienced in your workplace? So I'm going to shut up for a couple minutes and I'm going to let you guys chime in.
You can unmute if you'd like to weigh in. If you'd like to raise your hand, you can do that as well, or you can type it in the chat or the Q&A. So you do have a comment from John around a very top-heavy organization with many senior staff positions.
Can you say more about how that's a challenge for belonging and inclusion? Anyone else want to add to that? So how does having a top-heavy organization impede belonging? I'm curious about that.
I did send John a little alert to unmute. He's having some tech issues. So I can weigh in on that a little bit as
Yeah.
far as top-heavy organization. You may feel that decisions are made in a vacuum, so it doesn't include, you're not included, or you may feel like you don't belong with the answer or the decision that's made. Could be that I think just being in the right seat, right? Or even having a seat at the table can make an impact and make you feel like you don't belong at that table because you haven't been invited. And I'm just going to check the Q&A to see if John was able to come there. You have some other comments, feeling like my ideas were not heard.
Decisions that affect programs that many people work on are not included into that process. Yes, that's a big one. Major decisions that affect you, you're not at the table to even have a say about it, to even have express your thoughts, you know, how you might be impacted. It just happens and you have no control. A great one.
Yeah, and John also mentioned focus on the product versus the people. So more of that command control type of environment versus people-centered environment as well.
Yes, and that speaks to what Mr. Covey was mentioning earlier in his keynote. Yeah, so this sense that, you know, we need to just get things done and not worry about how people feel is not effective, as we're seeing, because we're seeing people leaving in droves in their organizations because they don't feel like they are there for the right reasons, that they don't feel valued, right? So I'm going to move right along because I know we're pressed for time. Thank you so much for those who did participate and share your thoughts. Okay, so can we measure belonging? Well, we can. I know it seems like a concept that is like, how do you really measure that? Well, there was a study recently using the belonging barometer. And the belonging barometer is a research tool that is used and was used to assess Americans' feelings about belonging and or if they lacked this sense of belonging. And what they did was the researchers looked at not just workplace, but they looked at life areas. So they looked at, do you feel like you belong in your family or your group, your family and friend setting, in the workplace, your local community, and then they looked at in the nation. And so this sample that they in this study was 4,905 individuals participated and used the barometer. And some of the questions on the barometer you can see here in the slide really get to the heart of the matter, right? So I feel emotionally connected to my organization. They ask you, you know, is this, you know, how much do you feel this way? How true is this statement for you? My coworkers welcome and include me in activities, right? I feel unable to influence collective decisions at my organization, as someone mentioned earlier. My coworkers value my contributions. My relationships with my coworkers are as satisfying as I want them to be. I feel like an insider who understands how my company works. They also ask questions about how you feel that you belong as someone in America, in this nation, which I really love. That's why I really love this this tool. And so it asks, you know, to what extent do you agree that you feel emotionally connected to the United States? How much do you feel that you are welcome and included in activities with other Americans? I feel unable to influence decisions that affect me in America. I feel unable to be my whole and authentic self when interacting with other Americans. Americans value the contributions of people like me. My relationships with other Americans are as satisfying as I want them to be. I feel like an insider who understands how the country works. I feel like I'm treated as less than others in this country. I feel like I truly belong in America. So as you can see from these questions, you know, this can spark a lot for people who have historically been ignored, looked over, marginalized, right? It's a sense of like, it's not just about I'm coming to work every day feeling like I could be myself, but how do I feel in my country? How do I feel in the United States where I live and work and pay taxes, right? So it's on a huge level here. You know, I bring this up just to say, when we think about belonging, think of it not just in one singular way, across different settings. So as we know, the COVID pandemic has really shaken up the traditional work model, leading more organizations to adopt a hybrid approach to work. So this implies that some employees will be on site while others will be working remotely, as you all have been a part of. So while this is a model that comes with many advantages, as we know, it also poses some challenges that we really should address. And so let's talk more about those challenges. So let me just dive into those. So empathy. Empathy, if we look at the dictionary, what does empathy actually mean? Empathy is the action of understanding, being aware, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another of either the past or present without having the feelings, thoughts, or experience fully communicated in an objectively explicit manner. Now, I know that's the word a mouthful, but basically that means is you don't actually have to have the experience of someone else to empathize with them or to understand how they might feel. So when we look at empathy at the cellular level, we see that our brains are hardwired for connection. And as humans, we thrive in a sense of relationships with others. So we are really built to have connections. So being empathetic is not a foreign thing for human beings. But over the course of this social distancing, the polarization in our country, we are seeing our empathy circuits actually weakened because we just are not spending enough time with each other, understanding each other's differences, accepting each other. And so we have some brain chemistry being altered as we continue to be isolated, continue to exclude other people. It does not just affect us at the surface. This is affecting our brains as well. And so I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about empathy at, you know, amidst the racial reckoning as we saw in 2020 and we continue to see. A 2011 study suggests that reducing unconscious biases can be as easy as putting ourselves in another person's shoes, right? Empathy. Participants were shown a video of a Black man experiencing discrimination and asked to think about how he may feel or what he would feel if they were him. And the results show that those who did this had a lower automatic bias than those who were asked to remain objective. Another experiment also showed that perspective taking does not lead people to ignore racial inequality. So at the basis of this, empathy is a driving force for us to connect, to understand how someone may not feel like they belong. Even if you, in your group setting, you feel like you belong, you have all those indicators of belonging, but that person next to you, that coworker next to you doesn't feel the same way you do. And being curious and asking why, you can have some empathy for what that answer might be for them. So I have a short video. This video is of Janae Johnson. She's a Black queer poet, a community organizer, teaching artist, and a full-time educator. And in this clip, she is honoring a youth who had passed away from APERT syndrome, which is a rare cranial facial anomaly, excuse me. And this caused Lily to be isolated while she was in school, to feel invisible. And so Janae is speaking to the sense that we need to stop isolating people. We need to have a better sense of belonging in our community. And so I wanted to share this with you. It's a poem that she wrote.
Tell me,
Can you hear
how
that?
do you magic? I mean, I want to assume each of us knows a trick or two, so I invite you to impress me. No smoke and mirrors, no deception or trickery, but rather, what do you have that we cannot see? Most days, I want to tell you how my magic swallowed splinters for the better part of my life. How I wore my queer, awkward Black kid like a numberless jersey, cursed my swollen hips, my blemished skin, felt like an island no one could quite figure out how to access. And back then, we didn't call it social isolation. Couldn't fathom the seriousness around the word anxiety. Didn't attempt to bend our tongue to the language of outsider. How fear can hiss and gnaw at the bottom of a stomach when we have to speak our name aloud, or figure out where to eat our lunch, or walk into any given classroom as our authentic self. I come from a generation of watering silence until it grows roots and blooms insecurity. It's a reminder that when we say social isolation, we don't always mean a bully with a hard shell of an ego and iron fist designed to smash metal lockers. Sometimes we mean the mirror. Sometimes we mean a tasteless inside joke. Sometimes we mean we weren't invited to the party. Sometimes we mean the hush of a clear night sky when we are too alone with our thoughts to admit we are lonely. Sometimes it is no one's fault, and it is everyone's responsibility. And sometimes what we need most in this world is an imperfect yet timely hello. I see you. Would you like to join me? So tell me, how do you magic? And I will tell you about Lily Rachel Smith, who by all accounts was her own sorcery, source of joy. Rumor has it she could unhinge a closed mouth and curl it into a half smile with very little effort. Lily, girl with purpose, friend with enough velocity to move time just for you, expert on holding people's stories like a bruised knee, wanting to know everything about you so she could serve a better world for you, daughter with a timely heart, sister with an infectious laugh. Here, we continue to honor a legacy not built around what Lily overcame, but what she gave in spite of APERT syndrome and teachers who didn't believe she could learn, in spite of eating lunches in the restroom and wondering whether or not she was worthy. Instead, Lily ignited a movement, moved us to a spirit of radical kindness even 10 years later, because no one should ever be made to feel like they are an island, like they are too small or insignificant or difficult to get to. So I guess when I say magic, what I mean is, here we are with all of this power, with this new language bending our tongue, with this ability to transform each other's experience. So how do you magic? How do you gift people the power of yourself and allow them to do the same? How do you find all the islands amongst you and attempt to build a bridge? You know, sometimes magic is about swallowing your own social anxiety. And other times, magic is as simple as an imperfect yet timely hello. I see you. Would you like to join me? Here we are with all of this power. So I invite you to impress me.
All right, thank you for that. That always touches me each time. So I hope that we don't have a lot of time to talk about that, but I hope that, you know, you walk away with asking yourself what you can do to increase a sense of connection where you are. So we know that empathic leadership really does matter. 82% of employees would consider leaving their work to be with an employer that was more empathic. 78% report that they would work longer hours and do more for an employer that was empathic. So there's a business case with this, right? This is important not only for the folks who are doing the work, the teams that matter, but it's also important for our organizations to continue thriving when they have folks that they genuinely want to be there because they feel like they are a part of something bigger. So some other issues with building a sense of belonging is communication. In our hybrid world, right? Communication is so difficult. You know, right now I use Teams for almost everything at work, and I can tell you there's been so many miscommunications just off of Teams and chats, and just thinking that they have a certain demeanor by their chat communication. And then when you actually have a conversation with them, you're like, oh my God, I was thinking something totally different, or, you know, now I understand what you mean by that, but they came off maybe in chat and maybe misunderstood. And so miscommunication is a huge thing. So we have to take more effort to talk, to get to know one another beyond the surface. Another challenge is just creating an inclusive culture. Upholding an inclusive culture takes daily and intentional action by everyone, not just someone who says that they are a leader because they've been promoted to their leadership role. This is every person has a role to play. In a hybrid work environment, it can be easy for remote workers to feel disconnected from the organization or from their team. They can feel like they don't have a good sense of the value that they bring or the mission. And this can lead to a lack of motivation and a sense of disengagement. We also know that microaggressions and micro insults, excluding others, will never, ever foster an inclusive culture or climate. So we all have a role to play in making sure that those things don't exist in our community, in our organizations. So I wanted to talk more about inclusive leadership as sort of our tools that we can use to really impart an inclusive environment wherever we go. So research by Deloitte has revealed that when people feel that they are treated fairly, that their uniqueness is appreciated, that there's a sense of belonging, that they have a voice in decision-making, then they will feel included and they will show up. And they also state that inclusive leadership is about treating people and groups fairly, that it's based on their unique characteristics rather than any stereotypes about them as a group or a person. It's about personalizing individuals and understanding their unique value and appreciating their diversity as individuals. It's also about leveraging the thinking of diverse groups for smarter ideation and decision-making. So we all know that diversity is good for organizations. When we have a diverse group, we create innovative things, we come together and we can make, positive change because we have different thoughts, ideas, experiences at the table. So let's talk about the 6 signature traits that can help build an inclusive culture. So commitment is one. So inclusive leaders are committed. They treat all team members with fairness and respect. They understand the uniqueness of each team member. They take action to ensure each member feels connected to the group or organization that they're in. They're proactive about how they adapt the work so that others, whoever's working in the team, can feel like they can do their best work. So sometimes our roles are very rigid. Well, a committed leader is going to find out, how can I make this job, or how can I make this fit for this person? So maybe this role does not highlight this person's strengths. How can I bring in a role that would help them highlight their strengths and be their best person at work? They also treat diversity and inclusion as a business priority. They take personal responsibility for diversity and inclusion outcomes. They see it as their mission to have a diverse group, to be inclusive at work. And they also allocate resources towards that. The other C is curiosity. So they're curious, right? They want to know about other people. They ask questions. They engage in respectful questioning, right? And it's not to just be nosy. They want to really understand others, and they want to be able to include them in conversations. They demonstrate this ability to see things from other people's viewpoints. So they have that empathic gene. They're also able to cope with change pretty effectively, and they can demonstrate and encourage divergent thinking. So they don't feel threatened by someone who has a better idea than them. They actually feel enlightened by that, and they want to include that person so that their ideas are also highlighted. Collaborative. Inclusive leaders give team members the freedom to handle difficult situations. They are not micromanaging. They're not standing over your shoulder. They're trusting. They empower team members to make decisions about issues that impact their work, right? So someone mentioned that earlier, right? So these major decisions are going to affect you. We're going to change the way we do business. I want your input on that, because you're the person that's going to be doing the work. That's so valuable. Collaborative leaders also anticipate and take appropriate action to address team conflict when it happens. So when they see those microaggressions, when they hear about someone being excluded, they don't just do nothing. They take action and they speak up. They make the change for that. They ask follow-up questions, and they want to make sure that the environment that they are a part of is safe for everybody. They're also culturally intelligent. So they take an active interest in learning about other cultures. They seek out opportunities to experience cultural diversity. They're really confident about leading cross-cultural teams. They seek out information on the local context. So they understand politics. They understand the ways that other groups are affected by certain politics and issues. They work well with individuals from different cultural backgrounds. And they have, they're able to really understand nonverbal and verbal communication, because we all communicate, not just verbally. We have nonverbal communication in our body language as well, facial expressions, eye contact, and things of that nature. And they have a cultural lens that they can apply to that. They're also courageous, and inclusive leaders are courageous because they acknowledge their own limits and their limitations and weaknesses. They also seek out ways that they can be better. They admit when they've made a mistake or hurt someone's feelings, and they approach diversity and inclusion with all their hearts, right? They are really committed and they want to do this right. They want to do the work right for not just for themselves, right? For the people that they're leading. And so they're also cognizant of bias. They learn about their own personal biases through feedback, and they're open to the feedback that they get. They also follow processes that ensure personal biases do not influence their decisions that they make, because they want to be inclusive of everybody. They also make sure that they work from a fair, merit-based place when they make decisions about hiring, about including people on their teams, about making decisions that affect others. And so how do you jumpstart a culture of belonging? Well, I'll jump through these really quickly for the sake of time. So the first thing is to do an assessment and find out, how do my folks feel? If you're leading a team, the first thing you can do is have a listening session. This is a great way to get information, just to listen, to ask questions, to see what stories come up, if there are any trends in the stories. But we recognize that as a leader, it may feel kind of threatening to be a part of a listening session because people may not be as open to share difficulties. So really be thinking about, is this the best strategy in your workplace? But listening sessions can be really effective. Stay interviews are also another strategy. So most people think stay interviews are sort of like exit interviews, but they're not. They are a way to gauge your top performers and understanding what is it that they feel about where they work. Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel like they're being appreciated enough? So you want to start small with stay interviews. You want to do them regularly, and you want to schedule enough time to do them. The research says 30 minutes to an hour is usually ideal. But you want to look for patterns and trends, really is the basis of this, to see, so you can get ahead of any potential issues that might arise. Climate surveys are another example. So in my organization, we do a climate survey, I think it's biannually, or not biannually, twice a year. And there's a DEI climate survey, and some examples of the questions they ask are things like, have you felt valued as a person? Have you felt that you belong? Do you feel that people have your back at work? Are your skills and experiences valued? They also ask questions like, were you intentionally excluded from work or social events? Were you verbally or physically abused at work? So it really gets to identifying any potential problem areas. Engagement is the other strategy, is really just getting to know people outside of work, asking questions that don't have to do with work. So how are your kids? How was that baseball game that you took your son to? How did that go? And just getting to know people really on that basic level. Scott Schute's work, he works for LinkedIn, and he talks about, I love this idea of the micro steps, right? So these are micro steps that we can bring to our workplace that focus on us as people, we, right? He talks about this language around, instead of me being we. And he says things like smiling and giving compliments can be really powerful each day, each morning. Good morning, I like your shirt, or how are you doing? Being curious, and not in a nosy way, but just to be really wanting to know about the other person. And then lastly, pulse checks. Pulse checks can be really, you can make them the way you would like, but this can be a set of questions that you would ask your folks. This can be mini check-ins, one-on-one check-ins, but the idea is to gauge how folks are doing, how they're feeling, to ask those questions that often get missed. So my last question here is, what tools or strategies have you or your organization implemented to gauge a sense of belonging while working in a hybrid environment? I'm just curious if there are any thoughts about that, any remaining strategies that you would like to share. Okay. Well, I will go ahead and leave you with some tools. So, Surgeon General has made a framework. This is a great toolkit that I would recommend you guys look into. And it's called the 5 Essentials for Workplace Mental Health and Wellbeing. And they look at many different aspects of well-being, but connection and community is one, and also mattering at work. And so they have many different strategies on how to build a sense of belonging at work using that those 5 essential that toolkit that he had put together. Excuse me. So I just wanted to leave you all with this quote. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference. And thank you so much for this time together.
Thank you so much, Shakima. This was definitely a powerful session, and just want to thank everyone for joining. And a reminder to take the time to complete your evaluation for the session that will be sent via email. Have a great afternoon, everyone.